Tonight on Next Generation Conservative, ending Washington's ruling class, we will discuss the need for term limits in Congress. That's tonight.
I am America, one voice, united we stand. I am America.
As the 112th Congressional session comes to a close, we look back on a session that was riddled with gridlock and partisan politics. Try thinking back to what was accomplished during this past session. If you can't think of anything, that's fine, because very little was done in this session or previous sessions with the 111th, 110th going back for a long period of time. Gallup currently has Congress's approval ratings at a dismal 18%. Now, there are many reasons to why Congress is viewed as ineffective by many in America. Part of it is because there is no longer an inflow of new ideas. There are many, both in the House and in the Senate, who have been in their position for decades and have become quite comfortable in their seat. And why shouldn't they be comfortable? After all, it is almost impossible to defeat an incumbent. With names such as Lautenberg, Kerry, or even on the Republican side, Lugar and Hatch, of course it's going to be challenging for a new opponent, whether in a primary or on a general election, to surpass such name recognition that they are up against. The truth is, there are members of Congress who really do need to retire. They have been in their position long enough, and it's time for them to pass the torch to someone who has new, fresh ideas. The Senate rewards the longest-serving member with the honorary title of Senate Pro Tempore. That currently goes to Hawaiian Senator Daniel Inouye. Senator Inouye has been in his position since 1963 and will be celebrating the 50th anniversary since coming to the Senate in January. Senator Inouye has been in the Senate since John F. Kennedy was president. He has lived through 10 presidential administrations during his tenure in the Senate. In my home state in New Jersey, Frank Lautenberg retired only to return to the Senate and is currently the oldest aged individual in the U.S. Senate at age 88, and he's still considering running for re-election in 2014. He will be 90 years old. And what new ideas has he brought in these past few sessions of Congress? New members of Congress bring with them fresh, ambitious ideas. But if they can't get these ideas passed in a period of 8 to 12 years, then they are just ineffective as a member of Congress. But many remain after 8 to 12 years because they now have that incumbency, that name recognition, that they are so widely recognized in their state that they can beat almost anyone who runs against them, no matter how qualified their opponent may be. This prevents fresh new faces from entering into the halls of Congress. Thus, we now have a ruling class which is almost impossible to remove. That is why there is a great need for term limits in Congress. Term limits would keep the constant flow of ideas moving. Thus, I propose an amendment similar to that of the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, which limited presidential term limits to 2 terms. I suggest that Congress looks at adopting an amendment that will limit congressional term limits to that of 6 terms for members of the House, 2 terms for members of the Senate. In total, that means 12 years members of the House and Senate have in order to get their ideas passed through Congress. If they can't get those ideas passed in the 12 years that they have, then they are ineffective as a member of Congress, or the overall American public does not agree with many of their ideas. And therefore, it is time for them to pass the torch on to a new face, one who can bring new ideas of his or her own to Congress. And thus, we keep Congress moving. We keep Congress working for the American people, for their constituencies. It is time to end the era of career politicians. Now, to ensure that this bill would have an easier passage through Congress, I also propose an idea that makes it more realistic. There are going to be members who are not going to want to cut their tenure, which is why I also propose that this bill would not affect current members of Congress, only those who would get elected after the passage of this amendment. It is a realistic idea and is a way to get even more members of Congress on board. Remember, the 22nd Amendment did not affect President Truman, under whose presidency it was passed. President Truman fulfilled all but 3 months of Roosevelt's 4th term. He then had a full first term of his own. Under the 22nd Amendment, he would have been made ineligible to run for a second term because he fulfilled much of his predecessor's fourth term. However, the 22nd Amendment had a clause that stated that it would not affect presidential term limits until 7 years after its passage. President Truman wanted to run for a full second term. However, he did not fare as well in the Democrat primary and was forced to bow out of the race, allowing for Adlai E. Stevens to run for the Democrat spot. This amendment limiting term limits in Congress would follow a similar idea that the 22nd Amendment followed. And that is, push hard for the term limits, but also know to get full support, sometimes you have to make compromises. But know that these compromises will make the passage of this bill more likely, and thus making it more effective as a piece of legislation. So what can we all do as next generation conservatives? I highly suggest becoming part of a grassroots movement. There are so many organizations out there that are pushing for term limits in Congress. If you agree with these ideas, you should definitely Google them and look for one of these organizations. One such group is U.S. Term Limits. You can find them at termlimits.org. I am in no way affiliated with them, but I have greatly read through much of what they have to offer, and I have much respect and agreement with what they have to offer. You can also get involved by putting together a petition calling for term limits in Congress and sending it to your representative or to your senator. 15 state legislatures have already adopted term limits, and now I feel it is time the Congress jumps on board. Congressional approval ratings can go almost no lower. So what do we have to lose? Let's try something new. Let's get some new faces in Congress. This is the way we can do it. I hope you will continue to be involved politically, whether it be in your local, county, state, or on the national level. Thank you. I am the Next Generation Conservative, and let's get Washington back to working for us.
There is still work that must be